This is a great day for the United States and a great day for South Korea.
Upgrading a free trade deal and briefing on inter-Korean relations, will the South Korean President Moon Jae-in convince his US counterpart, Donald Trump, to take the Korean peace process to the next level? Just a few days ago, the ROK President made his historic visit to the DPRK. The two sides agreed to work hard towards denuclearization and the elimination of all threats of war on the peninsula. What does the reaffirmed commitment mean to the region? Meanwhile, the DPRK has pledged to close a key missile test facility in the presence of international experts and potentially destroy its primary nuclear complex if the US will take reciprocal measures. How can the roadmap for denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula be established?
We have an agreement to work out another summit, and we look forward to doing that. I'm going to be meeting with Chairman Kim in the not-too-distant future.
And will Trump and Kim's second meeting reach substantial agreement on the definition of denuclearization in the near future?
South Korean President Moon Jae-in is in New York, briefing Donald Trump and trying to bring him on board a new push for peace. After meeting with his DPRK counterpart in Pyongyang, the ROK leader is eager to turn positive movement into tangible results. He's also now signed a new trade deal with his US ally. But how will the unpredictability of Donald Trump and the skepticism of much of the Washington establishment react to the possibility of the potential for big change on the Korean Peninsula? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Rong Yin, Vice President and a Senior Research Fellow of the China Institute of International Studies, and Mr. Einar Tangen, Current Affairs commentator. We'll also speak via satellite to CGTN correspondent Shane Harb in Seoul. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Pan Dong. So, gentlemen, it's quite clear that Moon Jae-in has two main tasks this time in New York. First is to brief US President Donald Trump and also the international community on the outcome of his latest summit with Kim Jong-un, the leader of DPRK, in Pyongyang. And the second is signing a new free trade agreement with the United States. Now, let's start with his first task. Do you think US President Donald Trump is happy about the outcome of the latest Kim-Moon summit?
Yeah, it seems that he's pretty happy, and President Moon has done a good job so far, because it seems that first of all he made a briefing about his trip to Pyongyang, and it seems that it was well received. But the more important thing is it seems that they have worked, the two President Moon and President Trump, about the agenda for the possible second summit meeting between DPRK and the US. And they talked about the agenda, they talked about the dates possibly, and also about the format. And I think this is a good development and being very well received by the international community.
Well, talking about good development, Einar, in his meeting with President Moon Jae-in, Donald Trump said, quote, "Chairman Kim has been really very open and terrific, frankly. I think he wants to see something happen." Shall we take Trump's words seriously on this one? Because last year it was Rocket Man. And if he's for sure, and what does something mean?
Well, something can mean a lot of things. Yeah, I would agree with you that you can't necessarily take the rhetoric coming from Donald Trump himself or his tweets too seriously. There's always an ability to walk it back. Rocket Man before, great guy today. Tomorrow it's back to Rocket Man. You don't know. So a lot of it depends. But I mean, let's get to the heart of the issue here, which is the fact that we don't know what DPRK wants in return. They've offered this, they've said they're willing to take down a nuclear facility, also one of the rocket engine facilities, in exchange for, something. And it's not clear that that can be given. I mean, Pompeo has been very upfront. He said there will be no economic walkback until there is complete denuclearization. And Donald Trump hasn't said that. He said it in the past. He's going to keep unrelenting pressure on and things like this. So the question is, how can you have a dialogue where the U.S. is going to give nothing and expect the DPRK to give everything? And this is also something that China and South Korea are very concerned about.
And that brings us to the biggest hurdle in U.S. DPRK talks. As Aina just mentioned, U.S. wants CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. But from so far, the DPRK has made it very clear that it should be a reciprocal process. That means they should meet somewhere in the middle of the road. Do you think this gap can be shortened, Mr. Long?
I think if you look at the summit, I mean the declaration that is signed, I mean in Singapore, there's a quite a clear sort of understanding between the two sides, DPRK and United States, how to pursue that. The DPRK, I think, pledged or committed to the kind of called complete denuclearization.
But what matters now is the roadmap, how
exactly.
to achieve that goal and how long. That's the sticking point, right?
I think that is why for me, the important for the recent summit between President Moon and Chairman Kim. It seems that they have worked out something, even though not in the public. I mean, in the public, in the declaration. So I just at least reported that President Moon bring a personal message to President Trump, and a lot of people are speculating that in this personal message from Chairman Kim to President Trump, it seems that there are some new pledges or commitment toward that. Mm-hmm. And the past few months since the June meeting was stopped exactly because of the question you raised. But it seems that they have, at least with the help of ROK President Moon, it seems that the DPRK has come up with something pretty clear, that they say how to do that, which is that they are looking for a kind of corresponding sort of steps, I mean, from the U.S. to fulfill their commitment. And for that, I think it's been clear, DPRK made it very clear repeatedly that they are looking for a kind of declaration to end the war on the peninsula, which I think the United States are not ready. But now it seems that after the visit, it seems that President Moon came with a message to President Trump that declaration can be a political sort of declaration, and which would take as a kind of gesture to end the hostile, so-called hostile policies DPRK, I mean, always want from the United States. So there are some, I think, developments, and the only thing is that how far we can, I mean, count on that, given to the fact that the domestic politics, the skepticism from the establishment, and more importantly, of course, President Trump himself, how much he would like to take, and what kind of how much he would like to pay in return. Because for DPRK's perspective, it has come quite a lot, quite a far. So are looking for something in return from the U.S.
Just as you mentioned, many curious questions were raised from the latest developments. The first one is, why the sudden change of stance regarding the DPRK from the United States? Because right before this Pyongyang summit, inter-Korean summit, Donald Trump called off Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang, and right after this summit, all of a sudden they are planning a second summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Why the sudden change?
Well, that's a really good question. Why would you say to China, let's engage in substantive trade talks, and then 3 days later say that I'm going to impose $200 billion worth of tariffs on you? No one really knows exactly why. There's a feeling that it's political, that he's playing to his base, that a lot of his pronouncements are simply a way of drying up the oxygen in D.C. and preventing people from talking about the litany of troubles. I mean, right now he has a U.S. Supreme Court justice who is in danger of not being confirmed. He has all sorts of issues that he has to deal with. But I want to get to two issues. First off, there's this issue about how reliable is Donald Trump. I mean, you know, Kim does not seem a fool. So far, he has played the PR game masterfully. I mean, he's suddenly emerged from, the guy who killed his brother and his uncle in horrible ways to this kind of nice, lovable figure who kind of waltzes along and smiles. Very, very good. But, I don't see that he's going to be fooled by Donald Trump. And the question is, does anybody trust Donald Trump, especially after you see the way he treats his allies, which is none too good. So do you want to be his ally and be treated like that? The second big issue is that this is, for a lot of Americans and the administration, in particular people like Pompeo, this is an old dance. Go back to 1985, they signed the non-proliferation, the DPRK enters into the non-proliferation treaty, and the next year they light off a nuclear bomb. And then in 2005, there's an accord, but in 2006, they're firing off missiles. So, I mean, there's really this idea that we've been down this road before, something has to change. The question is, can Donald Trump come up with it, and is he a reliable negotiating partner?
Having said that, are you implying that Trump is not playing this into the world peace, as he put it, but playing it into the upcoming midterm elections because he's losing so many fronts in domestic politics?
Well, I don't think there's much of a question about that. I mean, this is a small issue. It's not like there's a lot of trade with the DPRK. They're not, they haven't stolen any U.S. jobs. The issue here is it's just getting out front of this. I mean, I call it the nuclear seesaw. A few years ago, it was settling the Iranian issue. And DPRK was out in the wind. Now the seesaw has turned, and it's all attention on the DPRK while he dismantles everything that was settled with Iran. So for him, I think it's just keeping the balls in the air. It's just like running his TV reality show. When things are working, you keep more of it. If things are not working, you abandon it, you walk back, you do anything necessary to stay on air. And that's what I think how he views his presidency.
Right. For more on that, let's talk to our correspondent, Shane Ham in Seoul. Shane, so let's start with the Pyongyang Declaration, the pillar document reached by the two Korean leaders during their Pyongyang summit. And many ambitious goals have been listed in that particular document, but so far, have you seen any mechanism established to work them out and materialize at least some of it?
Well, it was a very wide-ranging declaration that was achieved between the two leaders, but much of the focus, obviously, for the entire world was on clause number 5, and you can look at it, sections A and B in that, and that has to do with peace here on the Korean Peninsula. Kim Jong-un agreeing to let outside inspectors in to observe their known missile launch engine test site and missile launch pads, and also, of course, these corresponding measures that the United States is being asked to take in order to achieve complete denuclearization and the opening up of the DPRK's Yongbyon facilities. So when President Moon arrived back here in South Korea following his trip to the DPRK and addressed the media here, he was asked what those corresponding measures are. He said he wasn't at liberty to divulge what they are, but he did hint at there is some possibility of a breakthrough on that, and that is what we have to presume that he was discussing with U.S. President Donald Trump during his meeting in New York today. So as far as the declaration is concerned, you talk about all the inter-Korean agreements that were made. Those are the easy things, but they do go hand in hand with the denuclearization issue as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they all play out together.
And earlier we talked about the different approaches from the U.S. and the DPRK towards the ultimate goal, denuclearization. The U.S. wants CVID, and the DPRK obviously wants a reciprocal process. Where does this difference put South Korea at this whole negotiation process?
Well, the worry has always been that South Korea could be stuck in the middle somehow, that somehow with this rapprochement that we're seeing between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, that somehow that could possibly drive a wedge in the alliance, the decades-old alliance between Seoul in Washington. But South Korea has always made it clear, not just recently but in the past as well, that the alliance is, quote, ironclad, and that the two allies are always in constant, regular and open discussions with all the latest that's happening. So you have to presume that that's happening right now as well. Over in New York overnight, we also heard that with regards to sanctions, at this point, the presidential office here in South Korea agrees that there's going to be no lifting of sanctions at this point because there has been no progress on the denuclearization front. So as far as what South Korea's position is, either President Moon can come out looking like a genius in this mediation process, or it could be a complete failure. But we have reached a point where President Moon, it's going to be very hard and difficult for him to take this back from where we've come so far just within the past 9-10 months.
Let's talk about this question. How far away is a peace treaty, a legally binding, internationally recognized peace treaty for a Korean Peninsula? How far away is it?
Yeah, for that peace treaty, I think it would take quite a long time and a lot of negotiations. That's why it's the importance, the declaration to the end of hostility or end of war comes into play. And I think the DPRK, it seems that as I think we have discussed, it's pretty clear. I think that they are very much looking forward to that, because for them, this has been kind of a commitment the U.S. has been made. There are speculations that possibly President Trump in Singapore may already expressed a personal commitment during his private talks with Putin.
The U.S. political establishment
ready
exactly.
For that? Exactly. I think the problem is that the establishment, I think, has a lot of misgivings and concern because it has security and political implications in terms of its commitment to the security on the peninsula and also the region beyond. So this is something I think the sticking point, and I think for me I'm pretty curious. I'm watching very closely with great interest that the message, what kind of message President Moon brought with him to President Trump. So if President Moon could help the two sides reach a point where I think the U.S. will be able to say, look, we can to some extent accept that, or the DPRK would feel that this is something I think more or less we are looking for, then I think the process that has been stalled can be kickstart and leading to the next round where I think the declarations of the sort of nuclear sites and other specific things, which I think largely the CVID would mean, and then leading to the later stage, the signing of the peace treaty. So we are talking about the kicking start, the start of a process which is being stuck for the past 3 months, and now I think the significance of the Pyongyang summit, of the inter-Korean meeting is exactly, I think, have at least gave some hope to breakthrough to that.
Right. Well, gentlemen, we'll be continuing this discussion after a short while. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. Stay with us. Well, gentlemen, now let's talk about the newly signed free trade agreement between the United States and South Korea. Donald Trump calls it a historic milestone in trade. Aina, is it really, or is it a milestone for him before the midterm elections?
Well, I think it's bragging rights, but I mean, if you look at the actual terms, it's a nothing burger, as they say. He increased the number of cars that can be exported into South Korea to 50,000. It sounds great, from 25. He doubled it, except we haven't sold more than 25,000 cars. He did not get an agreement regarding currency manipulation. And that was a big point. This is something he had promised Congress. He doesn't have that. But I do think that one thing is interesting. By accepting KORUS, and apparently among the Korean public, this has been accepted, there's this belief that peace with North Korea is more important. And what it does is it underlines the original KORUS agreement that opened up cars and beef to exports from America to South Korea, now that that is accepted, because there had been a lot of bad feelings about that. So there's a very small gain, but really I can't point to anything in that document which would indicate a big win for Donald Trump.
But what about the political weight it carries? Because it could be a major FTA signed by Trump with another country in quite a long time. He's getting nowhere in trade talks between world's major economies and
well,
the
but
U.S. neighbors.
he hasn't delivered. I mean, he had originally said he was going to make them pay for all of the military installations and more of the cost of having 28,000 troops and their dependents in South Korea. He was talking big about all the concessions he was going to get. And right now, he has nothing to deliver. I mean, as I said, it's a nothing burger. There's lots of bun, lots to talk about, but where's the meat?
And what about the impact of this FTA between U.S. and South Korea on regional FTA talks? Because China and South Korea, as well as Japan, are talking about an FTA for quite a long time. So do you think this U.S. ROK agreement will play into the whole momentum so far in the region?
Not in a particular way. But certainly, I think for me, it may mean something for the ongoing trade negotiations between the United States and Japan, which I think certainly the signing of that agreement may, I think, help Japan to think in a different way how to approach the talk, even though I think there are different issues different issues. The CGK, China, Japan, and South Korea free trade negotiations is something I think in a different, sort of different, because a different story, because more or less related standards that Japan is looking for, which is higher, while the Chinese and South Korean is possibly they have their own concerns. But I think I will refer to what we discussed about the so-called the kind of protocol for peace, and I mean the alliance. I mean South Korea and the United States, and for kind of the trade, the term negotiations. I think it is a clear indication that South Korea certainly want to show to the Trump administration that they are very much attached importance to that, and they would like to make some concessions for that. But how much or how significant is a different story.
Right, for more on that, let's talk to our correspondent Shane Ham in Seoul. Again, Shane, I'd like to start with the agricultural sector in South Korea, because South Korea is the 6th largest export market for U.S. agriculture, buying $6.9 billion worth of farm goods last year, and latest FTA signed has made South Korea the 2nd largest importer of U.S. beef after Japan by sales, and U.S. pork exports have also risen. Is there any concern from farmers in South Korea?
Well, any of the concern with agricultural products in this Chorus FTA was probably eased out over a decade ago when this Chorus free trade deal was first signed. No matter how much President Trump says this is a new deal, it's really an amendment to the existing one, and it's been in force here for over a decade now. Farmers here and, of course, beef producers were very worried about the impact of the market here being influxed by U.S. Beef and agricultural goods, but really we haven't seen that over the past decade, according to customs data, if you look at it. So really this revised free trade agreement that was signed overnight has really flown under the radar here in South Korea, and the way South Koreans look at it in terms of the overall picture and the alliance with the United States, President Trump is really the one that likes to lump all these issues together. Even before he became president, on the campaign trail, he would argue that the defense sharing cost burden on the United States was unfair. This free trade agreement with Korea was unfair as well, and of course the DPRK issue. So what we're seeing from the Moon administration is that if President Trump, if that's how he's going to go about dealing with these issues, then they are more than happy to sit down and talk and revise these trade agreements if it means an overall better and stronger alliance between Seoul and Washington.
What about the reaction from the automaking industry? Is it flying under radar as well?
Well, as far as automakers here, the local auto industry in and of itself is in trouble. Really, demand is low here. Sales are falling as well. The top two automakers, Hyundai and Kia, have gone through numerous labor union issues as well. Most recently, Chevrolet here, GM Korea, has had to really get a bailout from the government here because of falling sales. So really, it comes down to consumers and will they really want U.S.-made cars if they are cheaper than locally made cars as well. But if you look at foreign imports of autos, really they all come from Europe. German automakers are the #1 selling automakers here in South Korea, so it'll be interesting to see how this revision will impact the local auto industry.
So where exactly is South Korea heading in terms of trade? Because obviously protectionism is rising from some Western countries. So which is the preferred direction for South Korea? Is it RCEP or this trilateral free trade agreement with China and Japan?
Well, South Korea is an economy that's largely dependent on exports. In fact, more than half of the country's GDP or output depends on exports. So it has free trade agreements with the United States, with China. There's been talks of a possible trilateral deal with Japan as well, but that hasn't happened for several reasons. But South Korea has been very keen on free trade deals, starting with a free trade deal with Chile back in the 1990s as well. So we're going to continue to see, whether it be a liberal or a conservative administration here, that South Korea will continue to search for these free trade deals. The European Union is another one that comes to mind as well. So as far as the Chorus free trade deal and how it's happened and how it's played out over the past decade, numerous reports will show that both sides really have benefited from it since 2007.
Thank you very much, Shane Ham in Seoul. Ina, what do you make of the momentum in this particular part of the world? Is it RCEP taking momentum right now, and will that ambitious goal to finalize the negotiations of RCEP by the end of the year realized?
Well, everyone hopes so, but I mean, TPP is still on the table, and they're still relying on that. There's still a lot of talk about how that could be expanded. Obviously, Japan had wanted to do that, but I think the overall thing that we should be taking out of this is that the rest of the world is moving on. Donald Trump is not having the impact that he says. And if I'm Japan and I see this Chorus amendment, I would say, I would be very, very hopeful, because I'd say, well, why should I agree to anything more than what they've given you, which would amount to very, very little, only optics at this point. And maybe Donald Trump is desperate to have some good optics, and maybe that will be enough. But it's certainly a far cry from his campaign, Make America First and all this kind of rhetoric.
Well, Mr. Rung, we've talked a lot about the developments on the Korean Peninsula recently. What does that mean for China, both diplomatically and economically?
I think China certainly welcomes the latest positive developments on the region, and would hope that the momentum will continue. And that is why I think when the news came out, the immediate response from the Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister is great news, and we would like to see more, and we'd like to see the relevant parties work together and meet themselves on the halfway, and China will continue to play a constructive role to promote that. And that is also, I think, why in the President Xi, when he visited Vladivostok, and he made a very important speech that he would like to see that there are more coordination, more concerted efforts for the state peace and the development of the region as a whole. So I thought that China certainly welcomes that and would like to see more would be coming.
Right, South Korean President Moon Jae-in is also expected to brief the international community on the Inter-Korean summit during the UN General Assembly sessions in New York. So what do you make of the UN, especially the UN Security Council's role in solving this difficult problem?
I think the UN Security Council can certainly play a very important role. I think, first of all, there are the sanctions related. I mean, it's all And whether it will be continued or it will be, sort of relaxed or lifted, or that will be determined by the UN Security Council. But the more important thing, which China has been lobbying or campaigning for, is that given the positive development, in recent positive development, I think the UN Security Council should have done something. For example, issue a kind of a statement to praise or review the development and push for that.
To encourage the continuation
exactly.
Of the positive momentum.
I think it's possibly
Thank you
one
very
of
much.
the reasons
Thank you
why.
very much. Well, Mr. Rong Yin and Mr. Aina Tangen. And that's it for this edition of Dialogue. I'm Pandong in Beijing.